I got tired in listing all the problems to you. I listed 4 major problems with this trade. It looks so innocent. Knight is worth 3 pawns, bishop is worth 3 pawns. Who cares? Let's trade those pieces off. And that's how you're losing your games, you see? Let's be honest. You're blindly exchanging pieces. There is no consideration for your piece trades. For you, a knight is worth 3 pawns, the bishop is worth 3 pawns. Who cares? Let's trade them off. And you're losing games by blind exchanges. I looked at hundreds of games, thousands of games online, from beginners all the way to intermediate players. One thing struck me, that exchanges were extremely blind. People could not take and carry the tension even for a single move. So I compiled 10 terrible piece exchanges that I witnessed in those online games that has great instructional value. I will list them one by one today, and I will present them to you while also going through the correct thought process. Such instructive mistakes have great potential for us to improve as chess players. You will see how similar players are thinking through those strategic moments, and through my explanations you will fix those mental models. And let's start with number 10. Well, we are listing it from, let's say, bad exchange to the terrible ones. When we reach number 1, we are going to be seeing the terrible, most cringy exchanges that I witnessed, okay? Number 10 in the list. Bishop d6 is on the board. What should white play? Do you think, given this c5 outpost for the knight, do you think bishop takes d6 is a good move or a bad move, folks? It's as simple as that. In the actual game, bishop takes d6 took place, a terrible exchange, because that gave black an opportunity to fill that c5 outpost. Right now, there's beautiful control on that outpost. It's no longer an outpost, in fact, right? So knight on c5 would be an amazing piece if white kept the tension, and let's say play knight e5, because this is now preserved for our knight, this strong square on c5 that no black pawn can control, right? Positional chess. Instead, white exchanged on black's terms, and this beautiful pawn was not only controlling the central square on e5, nullifying knight e5s, but also stopping knight c5 ideas. Incredible, right? So by taking on d6, white has allowed a beautiful pawn on d6 that is burying and limiting both of the enemy knights. Look at the effect of that single pawn on d6 that is shutting down both of those knights. Both knights are crying, they are lacking any purpose in this position, and white gave it to himself by this blind and mindless piece trade. My number 9 in this list, folks. Please take a step back. White to play. How would you treat this position? Look at the big picture. Look at the imbalances in this position, okay? Let's do it together. White has the IQP on d4, and the black king is a bit misplaced on g8, right? This bishop is poor, but maybe we can play b5 at some point. Black has a beautiful knight on d5, an outpost, blockading the pawn. White's best piece is this knight on e4. That's a beautiful centralized knight. And also f5 knight is also a strong piece, let's say, for black, okay? So, given this orientation phase, and given that we have an IQP, isolated queen pawn, do you think this trade is good for white or black? Well, I sort of give away by this video, because you already know that that's a terrible exchange which happened in the actual game. By taking on f6, first of all, white has traded off their best piece. An amazing beautiful knight disappeared, and because white has the IQP, minor piece trades are favoring the opponent, right? Because as the game is closing to an endgame, this pawn will become a target, a liability, a weakness, in fact. That's why normally when we have the IQPs, we should generally avoid minor piece trades. So that's problem number 2 with this trade. Problem number 3, by taking on f6, you're allowing a pawn that is burying and shutting down your knight. Look at this. You allow the pawn to reach f6, and this single pawn is dominating your knight on f3. Your knight on f3 became a misplaced piece, as a result of your mindless piece exchange. And problem number 4, you also gave this beautiful g7 square for the king, guys. Look at this. Now the king has a safe haven on g7 because of this mindless trade on f6. Oh my god, I got tired in listing all the problems to you. I listed 4 major problems with this trade. It looks so innocent. Knight is worth 3 pawns, bishop is worth 3 pawns. Who cares? Let's trade those pieces off. And that's how you're losing your games, you see? That's why I created a Chessable course about this. The art of exchanging pieces. They are so committal, so beautiful, also so instructive, right? Because they are giving us opportunities to explain those strategic factors to you to improve your game. Please, if you really carefully listen to my thought process, folks, it must be clear to you right now why this was sort of a chess crime to take on f6. In fact, look at the evaluation bar. White is 0.2 right now. After you take, it becomes minus 1.3. So it's almost like you lost 1.5 points by this mindless piece trade. And it's all because of those 4 points I mentioned to you guys. Black to play, folks. Look at the pawn structure, please. It came from Caro-Kann Tartakover, right? Now there's a queen trade option. Do you think black should trade the queens or should black preserve those queens? Do you remember the first question whenever queen trade is an option? Whose king is safer? Whose king is safer? Of course, that's the first question, right? So please judge whose king is safer, guys. Right? Double pawns are shielding our king in the middle game in those structures. Our king is safer. And also there are knight f3 options on the board. Our rook is a beautiful place. So no queen trade. Queen h5 was Alexander Alekhin's choice. But when I gave this position to several of my students across the years, I was witnessing sometimes this trade on g2. And again, it's almost like black is losing 1.8 points by this mindless piece trade, because look what has happened here. The white king has become so much safer after the queen trade, and now your double pawns are hurting you in this endgame. Because imagine all the pieces are traded off and you end up in a pawn endgame. Who is winning that pawn endgame and why? Of course, white is winning, folks, because white has a healthy pawn majority on the queen side. 4 versus 3, they can create a pass pawn, but your pawn majority is crippled on the king side because of those double pawns. If you don't trust me, please take this position, pawn endgame, and play it against your training partners or against the bot, right? So by taking the queen, the second problem is that you're going to lose all the pawn endgames and you're giving white chances to win this position. If queen h5, look at this. Knight f3 is in the air, queen e2 invasions are in the air, the king is suffering on g1. You play the position without even much calculation, just keep the queens on the board and you take it from there. Number 7 in the list, folks, white to play. How would you treat this position with the white pieces, folks? First things first, white has an extra pawn. And people think blindly that once we have a material advantage, let's trade pieces, right? Because one chess principle says that. With the extra pawn, generally, piece trades are favoring us, right? Because we are coming one step closer to a pawn endgame. And that's exactly why white player made the cringy move, bishop takes c6 in this position, for the sole purpose of simplifying the position to claim their extra pawn. But look what they just given to black. They made this rook an amazing strong piece. There's only a single open file, and the black rook is dominating that open file. This was an amazing, mindless, and terrible piece trade. Also, this bishop is an amazing piece. Look at this, putting pressure on the pawn on b7. So white is voluntarily giving up the bishop for the knight. That does nothing, by the way, on c6. It's just a terrible piece. And in the end, just creating a monstrous rook on c6. I'm cringing when I'm seeing such moves, guys. Again, white is losing more than 1.5 points by this trade. It's incredible. The engine is giving like 2.3 plus 2.3 to white right now. If you take that knight, it only becomes 0.5. I hope after my explanations, this becomes obvious to you, because this is how real learning takes place. I want you to explain why those moves are terrible moves in this current moment by going through the why questions, right? Deeper engagement, please, folks. What is the best move for white then? How would you play with the white pieces? Of course, my worst place piece is the sleeping rook on f1 and there's only a single open file, so you play the move without calculation. Simplest possible move, and white has a winning advantage purely because of their piece activity, I would say here. Not only the extra pawn on d4. Of course, that's also a very important asset, but also you're improving your pieces, you're challenging the c file, you're putting pressure on the pawn on b7, and you take it from there. So what's the lesson? Don't blindly apply that principle. When extra pawn, trade pieces. Many people use this blindly, and they engage in such chess crimes as a result. Black to play here, folks. Please focus on the pawn structure. What are you seeing in this position? When you look at the pawn structure, folks, you should very quickly see this pawn triangle, and you should see this d4 outpost for that knight, right? That has become a weak square, and we want to use weak squares with our pieces in chess. That's a beautiful destination for the knight in the future, right? There is no pawn that can control that square anymore. Thus, black has a long-term positional advantage, namely the d4 outpost. So, given this orientation phase, folks, can you please tell me whether that's a good move for black? Black offered a minor piece trade in his position with this move, and this move cringes me because it allows white to fill the outpost square with a pawn. Look at this. Now, as a result of this blind piece trade, this outpost square has been nullified because there's a pawn that is standing on that square. So in this position, black was putting pressure on that big square, thus tying down the white knight. So by doing this mindless piece exchange, you're easing white's defensive task, correct? These two pieces were not equal value. You have an attacking knight threatening to jump to the outpost. Thus, this knight is becoming paralyzed in guarding that square. But if you jump directly to d4, you're only helping the opponent. Incredible oversight. It happens all the time in beginner games because they have no considerations for such weak squares, outposts, who is attacking, who is defending, right? For a beginner's mind, these two knights are of equal value because all knights are worth 3 pawns. And I want you to now change your mental models after this video. Also, my course on Chessable, the art of exchanging pieces, will drill those examples to your brain. It will be automatized in your thought process. All right, folks? But I hope this is clear. When I see such moves as a chess coach, something is really triggering, right? Deep inside. Don't do this to yourself, please. Number 5 in the list is coming from this advanced French pawn structure. And most of you French nerds or strong players can anticipate which crazy trade will take place right now. Yes, white player went bishop b5, and after bishop d7, they took the bishop on d7, folks. Look what has just happened in this position. If you take a step back, that's your good bishop in this pawn formation, right? For example, you could have gone to d3, later followed it up with h4, h5 to soften that diagonal. Your bishop is a beautiful piece in this pawn structure. And look at the French bishop on c8. That bishop is sleeping, totally buried inside that pawn chain. Black needs to suffer so much to be able to trade the bishop, if at all. It won't be even possible, but if at all, they need to spend so much effort for that piece trade. And look what white is occasionally or casually doing in this case. Happens all the time also for beginners. They see a check, they check like a patzer, and then they basically blindly exchange those pieces. Can you already anticipate, folks? This is totally about understanding good pieces and bad pieces for you to avoid even looking at that move as a candidate, right? Like once you see the good bishop and the bad bishop, this is not even in your radar, this kind of an idea. But this happens all the time. Now you have just solved black's main problem. The French bishop is gone and your good bishop is also gone. You're left with the bad bishop on c1 and black is having an okay game in this position. Now we are moving down the list, folks. We are approaching, well, true chess crimes. Although now I have a feeling that there's already some amazingly crazy mistakes that could have moved forward in this list. So please give me feedback. If there was a position that particularly struck you that I should have maybe prioritized in this list, tell me, please, okay? Let's go for this. Number 4 in this list, folks. Again, please take a step back. What are you seeing in this position? Let's start from there. What are you seeing, folks? Equal number of pawns, I'm seeing a buried bishop on c1, terrible piece, terrible knight, terrible rook. The queen side is frozen. I'm seeing a pinned knight on d4, right? That piece is pinned. I'm seeing a king in the center and the alignment. So what's the most logical move for black? Of course, you castle short and you take it from there. Without much calculation, you play it and you take it from there. Maybe you'll play knight e5 to d3. Maybe you'll create an octopus on d3 in 2 moves. Black has so many ways to improve this position. Now, in the actual game, folks, a crazy move has taken place. Black just took the pinned knight on d4. And that's usually a chess crime to take a pinned piece. Of course, there are exceptions in chess. But generally, when you see a trade like this, something is very strange, right? Because that knight is pinned, has 0 value, does nothing on the square. You can always take it later. In this case, you're doing this exchange without even being forced, right? And look what you're giving to white as a result. That terrible knight on b1 now gained this beautiful c3 square as a result of your mindless piece exchange. From there, it will hit your weak pawn on d5. That will be an active piece, correct? Also, after takes, look at your knight on d7. This guy had great potential a move ago to reach d3 and become an octopus. Right now, after c takes d4, this pawn is burying this knight on d7. Can you see it, folks? So once you start talking to the pieces, this knight is crying after this exchange, this guy, and this knight is so happy to see this exchange on d4, right? It's coming to c3 on the next turn. But you have a sleeping and crying knight suddenly. Also, you just let white achieve a central pawn. Now there's a pawn in the center. They will play d3 to activate their bishop, and white is very close to equality in general here. Compare this exchange with this move. Black has complete domination, not to mention those ideas, almost like minus 1.5 advantage to black, in fact, purely from positional reasons. And look, with a single exchange, by the way, why does this exchange take place? Let's look at the reasons why a beginner makes this mistake. He thinks to himself, hey, I'm giving you double pawns. Look at me. I'm such a great positional player that by taking your knight, I'm giving you those double pawns. You will suffer because of those double pawns. Can you see the shallowness of this thought process? He doesn't see that knight is pinned, can always be captured later. I have a good bishop in this position that is putting pressure. I have those ideas in mind later on. And you have sleeping pieces on the queen side. Thus, this thought process is ignoring all these other factors as well. Number 3 in the list, folks. I'm sure you've seen similar positions many times before in your life. Knight d5 was black's last move. They are creating some tension between those minor pieces. How would you negotiate this tension with white? Please tell me the best move for white in this position. You're a great player if you came up with the move e4 and you're exchanging off on your own terms. Well, if they take on c3, you take back and look at your beautiful pawn center. As a result of the correct trade, you're also gaining tempo on the bishop. If the bishop drops back, then you play moves like rook 8, bishop a3, for example, or e5 even, right? You have a beautiful advantage for white. If bishop does this, then comes a pawn fork, and basically you achieve a beautiful and mobile pawn center as a result of this trade. The bishop is crying, the queen side is frozen. White has intensified the advantage as a result of a simple move. By the way, you also activated your bad bishop as a result of this e4 move, correct? But in those beginner games, it happens all the time. People take on d5 with a knight or bishop without thinking. Incredible. I almost like cry when I see moves like this, which happens all the time. Look what is going on here. You're allowing e takes d5, and that terrible bishop is coming to life. Black is placing a pawn in the center. Black is actually expanding their central control as a result of your blind exchange. Moreover, this bishop is shut down from the game as a result of this structural change. Incredible, right? Please, folks, look at this move knight takes c5 and please understand why that's a clear chess crime. Now, black is better suddenly. Minus 0.5 to black. In this position, let me tell you, it was almost 1.6 for white. So you almost lost 2 full pawns as a result of taking on d5. Incredible, right? Incredible blind exchange. if you're only looking at piece values, it looks like an equal trade for you. But chess is a beautiful game with so many nice dimensions that hopefully it now becomes clear to you why this was a chess crime. We are approaching to second and the first position, folks. And I'm sure many of you are already cringing and crying, anticipating what exchange has taken place in this position, folks. This was one of my Chessable course positions, and I'm checking Chessable user mistakes, and unfortunately, this move was one of the top mistakes that many people tried on Chessable. First things first, please observe what's going on in this position, folks. There's only a single open file, and those rooks are shooting at each other. So the fight is totally to occupy and dominate the only open file. So the question for white is, can I force a trade on c1? So it's my rook who is taking over the only open file, follow it up with the invasion of the 7th rank. Right? That becomes our goal. And once you set your goal properly, you will find the move bishop h3. That's a beautiful move. White wants to exchange on their own terms. Right? After you take on c1, look at this. White has a completely winning advantage, pure positional domination. That knight sucks on g6. This rook sucks on d8. Rook c7 is coming next. The game is virtually over in this position. Black is having a hugely difficult task defending this position. Why? Because white understood the essence of the position and played bishop h3. Now, Chessable users, oh my god, they play the move rook takes c8, folks. Yes, unfortunately, I can't even look at the screen when I see moves like this, right? Like something terrific is taking place here with such moves. Because by this blind exchange, white is giving the only open file to black. White is letting the black rook to dominate the c file in this position. And now look at your rook on a1. Just compare that rook with the rook we just showed you, right? Could invade the 7th rank. Incredible. Black is taking over the game. Black is slightly better. Despite this knight being terrible, they have time to improve that beast at some point. But how are you going to improve this rook and challenge that amazing rook on c8? Look at this, folks. People engage in such blind piece trades. So this is definitely number 2 in my list. Could have even become number 1. We can discuss later on maybe. Maybe some of you would put this position to number 1 on the list. But I hope the message is clear. In rook endgames, we want an active rook that occupies an open file. If there's only a single open file on the board, you first occupy it and then you invade the 7th rank. And please understand why white is having a winning advantage here. The final position in the list, folks, is this one, black to play. White just played the move knight d5. Again, I want you to take a step back, look at the big picture, look at the pawn structure, see what's going on, good pieces, bad pieces, and then we are talking, right? Then we are talking. Folks, in this case, one thing should strike you, that black has this beautiful d4 outpost for knight. If there's a single good piece in black's position, the knight on d4 must be that piece. That beast is a beautiful creature on d4. No white pawn can chase that knight away. It's just an excellent piece. That's a pride of our position. After knight d5, obviously we are facing the threat of bishop takes or knight takes on f6. Our knight is pinned. Okay? How about this bishop? If I ask you, for example, what are your thoughts about the bishop on f3 here, folks? What do you say? That's a terrible bishop, of course, because there is a central pawn that is blocked on the same color as this bishop. Okay? So we have a beautiful knight, they have a bad bishop, and plus we are facing some issues. So tell me, please, the move that gives black the advantage in this position. How do you resolve this pressure on that diagonal? Yes, we have no phantom fears, folks. We can push the pawn in front of our king because white is not in a position to open up lines or destroy our pawn cover. So after bishop g3, let's say, well, look at the bishop on g3. Now we have time to chop off white's beautiful knight on d5. We are preserving our knight on d4, and you can play the position in many different ways. Black has so many different ways to play. Maybe queen f6 comes to mind, right? Maybe a5 comes to mind to stop b4, then you'll play a4 to create those ideas. Then maybe you can play b5, b4 to create play on the queen side. One thing is clear, this bishop will remain on the board because that's a piece that does nothing in the position. You will preserve your knight on d4. Also, this bishop does nothing on this diagonal. Please, folks, look at white's bishops. They do nothing in this position. So black would keep a clear edge if they play this way. But of course, after knight d5, black player very quickly took the bishop on f3. Oh my god, they just gave away their amazing knight on an outpost for a terrible bishop on f3. Not only that, but after this recapture, this pressure has been mounting. So this was not only a strategic chess crime, but also a huge tactical mistake, and white is a completely winning advantage because now g5 doesn't work because of this check, right? You're losing a piece. And if g5 doesn't work, then things are collapsing on f6 on the next turn. These kind of mistakes are happening all the time at beginner levels because he's thinking probably, oh, I'm feeling some pressure here. And when people feel pressure, they want to resolve the tension as soon as possible, right? This tension resolving move loses the queen, so he's going for the other tension releasing move somehow. He also probably ignores the move altogether because he's thinking, hey, that's bad for my king's safety. So he's ignoring the best move as well in this position, folks. Beautiful example, but to me, even the consideration of exchanging your amazing knight for that poor bishop on f3 is putting this position into this list. I hope you like this episode, folks. The reason I'm doing this is not to shame other people, but to actually point out those instructive moments that we can all learn together. That was the reason I created my course, Chess, Crime and Punishment. It's full of such club player, beginner level mistakes, but top process mistakes, right? Strategic chess mistakes, just like today's episode. Because there's tremendous potential to grow as a player by seeing what a mistake looks like in chess. So we can then change our erroneous mental models this way. Of course, it must be supported by the whys behind those mistakes. Someone should clearly explain to you the reasons why those moves are mistakes. Because only then, right, conceptual change can take place. And let's be honest with me. Were you also failing those positions in the same way as these people have failed? Then accept the mistake, because that's the first step for the cure. Once you accept your mental models are not perfect, then there is room for improvement. Please don't hesitate asking me anything on this channel. I'm here to clarify and explain those concepts. All right? Please give me feedback on YouTube. Your ideas, your explanation of why these mistakes are taking place and how we can get better at this crucial part of chess. All exchanges are committal because those pieces are exchanged are not coming back into the game. So we have to be very considerate in those critical moments. And hopefully you will also fight against those chess principles in a situation like this. I have an extra pawn. Let's trade some pieces and simplify the situation. Chess, being such a beautiful game, cannot be reduced to single algorithms that always work. There are always exceptions in this beautiful game, and I hope I clarified some of those exceptions to you in today's episode. Bye-bye.